Good morning, good afternoon, and
Good evening.
welcome to R.W.A. Radicals with Age. My name is Jesse.
And my name is Pancho.
We are filming this episode on November 22nd, 2024. But this episode is going to air the week after Thanksgiving in the United States. And from last week's episode, we did mention Christopher Columbus a little bit and got into, of course, one of the big names in American history, especially around Thanksgiving and the discovery of the United States. The day after Thanksgiving, I just found this out. I was looking at my phone. I had no idea. I know that day as Black Friday, the second best Steely Dan song that starts with the word black. Do you agree with that claim?
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Black Cow is definitely better than
Black
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 Friday.
Cow, Black Cow is better.
Is to not go down a huge rabbit hole, but quickly. I'm sure the listeners are dying to know. Do you have a favorite Steely Dan album? Because mine is definitely Asia.
There's not even a conversation about that. I mean, Asia has Wayne.
Well, then there you go.
There you go.
We are in agreement.
We are totally in agreement.
And that album starts off with not Black Friday, but Black Cow.
Black Cow.
Anywho, Black Friday, if you go look at your phone, iPhone users, Black Friday is not in there on the day after Thanksgiving. The day after Thanksgiving is Native American Heritage Day, which I had no idea. I hold a Native American Studies minor and yet was not aware of this. And so I did a little bit of history. In 1986, Congress proposed to your boy, Ronald Wilson Reagan, president at the time, that the week of Thanksgiving be declared American Indian Week, which he did, and I guess gave some little proclamation where he thanked all of the Native Americans for their contributions to this country. I assume he didn't talk about how most of them were genocided. Then, 4 years later, in 1990, Congress passed a bill, or no, I think it was once again a request. Congress, submitted this request to your other boy, George H.W. Bush. Wait, we're doing whole names. George Herbert Walker Bush, to make November Native American Heritage Month. And that persisted, unbeknownst to most Americans, it seems, all the way until 2008, where George Walker Bush signed actually a bill that Congress passed to make the day after Thanksgiving Native American Heritage Day. One more date, if you're not aware, Thanksgiving Day is the national day of mourning for Native Americans. And so to have the day after this day of mourning be the Heritage Day is something that has faced much criticism. I would assume when most folks think or talk about Native Americans, American Indians, Indigenous people, they often talk about either, racist stereotypes, or if they're a little bit more conscious, then they talk about the atrocities that the American government committed to millions of people across hundreds of distinct native nations or tribes, as some folks like to say. And so today, rather than diving into that history, which is really important history to go look at some of these really intense episodes of genocide and settler colonialism, and we will get into that a bit. But what I wanted to try and do today was, rather than having another program about the plight of Native Americans and how they're continuing to be erased from society and American culture in order to justify and preserve all of the stolen land that has happened. Instead, I'm suggesting that we have an episode that is honoring and elevating and presenting various Native voices in history, literature, popular culture, etc. And so I hope you all are excited and are ready to strap in for episode 10 of Radicals with Age. And I'm going to kick it over to my father, who I think is going to get us started with a poem, if I'm not incorrect.
Before I read the poem, I have to remind you, not only did you refer to Ronald Reagan as my boy when he was president, but I also had the pleasure of living in California when he was the governor. And so I am especially close to Ronnie and to Nancy, who said, just say no.
Right. If only she
So,
had just said no to Reagan.
exactly. So, to add on a little bit to your opening, it seems to me that the indigenous population is often talked about in the past tense. And what we are going to attempt to do in this episode is to talk about American Indians in the present tense. People think that Indians, like died out or whatever. And there are millions of American Indians all over the country, some still living on reservations and lots not. And so we want to pay attention to that American Indians are an ongoing entity as opposed to something only in the past in Hollywood movies or in stupid things like The Lone Ranger and Tonto.
Right. Which is not just this thing that has happened, it is intentional to put Native Americans in, as one of my intellectual heroes, Chris Finley says, into anachronistic space, that it's these people, yeah, only of the past, because if they're only people of the past, then they more or less don't exist anymore. And again, justifies these colonialist claims.
Precisely. So I'm going to start by reading a poem. And this is a poem from the recently deceased N. Scott Momaday, who is one of my all-time favorite writers. He was the first American Indian to win the Pulitzer Prize for his first novel, House Made of Dawn, which takes place at Jemez Pueblo in New Mexico, my second spiritual home. So this poem is from his next to last book. The book is entitled Earth Keeper, Reflections on the American Land. The poem does not have a title. Something of our relationship to the earth is determined by the particular place we stand at a given time. If you stand still long enough to observe carefully the things around you, you will find beauty and you will know wonder. If you see a leaf carried along on the flow of a river, you might ponder its journey. Where did it begin and where will it end? What will be the story of its passage? You will discover 1,000 ways in which the leaf is connected to the water, the banks, the near and farther distances, the sky, and the sun. Your mind, your spirit will be nourished and grow. You will become one with what you see. Consider what it is to be seen. Scott Momaday.
I've never heard that poem before. I have read a couple of Mama Day books, but yeah, really cool. I like that a lot. Thank you for grabbing that for us.
And I'll just say, if people are not um, sufficiently in the know, there was a quote unquote literary movement called the New Native Renaissance that began with Momaday and his winning of the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in the late 60s. And the writers who are associated with that are Louise Erdrich and Leslie Silko and James Welch and Simon Ortiz. You should read all of those people.
And I've only read the first couple. The beginning, it's funny, the beginning of the list, I'm like, yes, check, yes, I like what you did there. But the last couple, I have not. So yeah, every week I love getting more homework, more resources, and that's what this program is about, right? We are just two radicals with two different ages trying to express our commitment to love and optimism and revolutionary system level change, but also recognizing that we are just two people and that there are hundreds, if not easily thousands more that have been doing this work and preserving this tradition. And yeah, if you don't like our voices or if you don't like podcasts, you prefer to read books, which is a dying, dying group of people these days, but still, this work is really, really important. Yes, you are certainly someone who likes to read books.
I want to mention some sources of information that people can tap into to understand how the native population is living and existing in the present moment. So I subscribe to Native News online. I also give money to the Native American Rights Fund, which deals with legal cases. They're based in Boulder, I think. They are the main organization that argues in court over tribal rights of various kinds. I also get emails from the Native Voters Alliance in Nevada, which talks about how the story of Indigenous people is happening there. I'm also a member of the National American Indian Museum in DC on the Mall. If you have never gone to their website and checked it out, you should. Also, there are a number of recent historical texts that I would like to make people aware of. The first is Ed Blackhawk's book called The Rediscovery of America. He is of Western Shoshone heritage. There is Kathleen Duvall's book, Native Nations. And there is literary, non-historical work by writers like Tommy Orange, Cheyenne and Arapaho, his great novel, There. And I would also like to single out the work of,
It is here,
yes,
here, there, there.
it is here, there. Do you know the origin of the phrase there?
No, please enlighten me.
Hmm. So Tommy Orange is writing about Oakland, Indians not living on the res, living in Oakland. And the there is from Gertrude Stein, early 20th century American writer.
Yes, of
And
course.
and she was referring to Oakland, and she said, there is no there, meaning Oakland was a shithole city.
Yeah,
So Tommy Orange is taking that and turning it upside down and showing that there is vibrant Native American life happening in Oakland, despite what Gertrude Stein said.
yeah. And I think this is a funny time to insert that when we were talking about doing this episode a few days ago, I pulled out this book and said, "Oh, I'm sure you've read this and heard of Tommy Orange," to which you replied,
Oh, I interviewed him when he came to read.
right. So, yes, the personal connections are are deep. And yeah, I think you maybe it looked like I cut you off. So if you have more
I
names,
just I
please.
want to one other writer I wanted to mention was Larissa Fasthorse, whose play, the Thanksgiving play,
Hmm.
was the first play ever on Broadway by an American Indian writer. And actually, before it even got to Broadway, it was produced at one of the theaters I work at in Portland. So we have a close connection to her. And Thanksgiving play is really cool. People should check it out and read it. So the point of all this, again, is to emphasize the fact that American Indians are a present reality. They are not something of the past. And we are taking this episode as an attempt, however mediocre it ends up being, we are taking this as an attempt to celebrate Native heritage and to get away from the stereotypes of Indians in the past, you know, getting wiped out by white soldiers in every Hollywood movie that ever existed about Indians, um, or other things like that, or the myth about Thanksgiving. Um, we want to look at the present and not at the past.
Did you still have a section or things you wanted to say about Wounded Knee, or did you move away from that?
Wounded Knee. Well, of course, as I assume most people know, in the late 1800s, American soldiers massacred the American Indian population in Wounded Knee, South Dakota, threw bodies into a big ditch. It was disgusting. From many people's perspectives, that was sort of the last stand of Indians, and that after that, Indians were not a significant deterrent to American manifest destiny. Because, of course, in South Dakota, which was sacred land to the Lakota, gold was discovered. And even though the land had been promised to Indians in perpetuity, after gold was discovered, white settlers came in and they wanted to get rid of as many Indians as they could, which brings up another sort of sidebar that on Lakota territory, we have the infamous Mount Rushmore, which, if you haven't thought about it recently, Mount Rushmore has four heads: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, both slaveholders, Abraham Lincoln, who quote unquote freed the slaves, but didn't really. And the fourth person is Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt was once asked a question about his feelings about Indians. And he referred to the quote that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And he said, that might not be true, but it's probably true for 9 out of 10.
Mm.
So we have this monument in South Dakota on native land to the supposedly four great American presidents, and they're all fucked up in various ways.
Yeah.
So it's sad.
However,
And
oh,
that
please.
gets and then that gets to what happened in the 1970s with the American Indian movement and the attempt to reclaim the legacy of Wounded Knee. And the FBI went in and people were killed. And most notably, Leonard Peltier was arrested for supposedly killing an FBI agent. and he has remained in prison to this day.
To this day.
And the person who was the main accuser of him in his trial recanted. And despite that, the government, the president, whoever, he could be pardoned by the president. He has major health problems. He
Is
has
he in
been
his 80s or 90s? He's old now too.
he's in his, I think he's in his 80s, and he has significant health problems. And he's a really cool painter as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, really the whole notion of life imprisonment is just so wild to me. Obviously better than, well, depends on who you ask, maybe better than the death penalty, certainly from a state perspective. I don't think the state should be killing anyone. So at least life is better than the state executing you. But yeah, it's still so horrific. It's expensive. And again, Leonard Peltier is not going to go kill an FBI agent. It's possible he didn't even do it in the first place. But even still, there's no 80-year-old man who's going to be able to carry out something like that. And
Well, of
that,
course, he wasn't 80 when he supposedly committed the acts. I mean, there
of
was a shootout between Indians and FBI agents, and an FBI agent was shot and killed.
yes.
The question is whether Leonard is the person who did it, and all the evidence suggests that he was not the person who did it.
And my point was, even if he did, the man is now sick and old and
It-
isn't going to do it again, even if he had, which he probably didn't. However, that's what I wanted to get to with the 70s and the American Indian movement and indirectly Wounded Knee, because one of a story I think people should know about is about one of my favorite bands. They are called Redbone, and they started in the 70s around this time. They are comprised of quite a few members, but were started by Lolly and Pat Vegas in Los Angeles. They are of Mexican descent as well as Yaqui and Shoshone nations. And they were the first Native American band to reach the top five on the Billboard charts with their 1974 hit "Come and Get Your Love," which every single person in the United States knows because it is now the main song for the Guardians of the Galaxy Marvel movies. Really, really good song. However, people probably don't know that that song and that band almost didn't really happen because in 1973, before that song was released, they put out a different song, which we will talk about at the end of the episode as well. It's our song of the week. The song is entitled "We Were All Wounded at Wounded Knee." And this song was so controversial that despite Redbone putting out 3 albums previously that did pretty well in the US and abroad, when this song came out, and again, you already mentioned, the FBI having quite a lot to say about Native resistance at this time, the 70s in the US. And so there was this campaign that the FBI was a part of to blacklist this band and this music. And so when the song was released, it did not get played in the United States. It was banned, essentially. It did have a decent amount of commercial success abroad, but it was a big turning point for this band. And fortunately, we talked a lot about Bob Marley last week and his political songs. And this is a sort of nuanced point that I've been thinking about is sometimes to exist in this system, you have to, you have to do things. And I've already mentioned her once. I'm going to mention her now again. And I have a quote from her for later, Chris Finley, a professor of mine, who said, "You can't be a revolutionary all the time. If you did that, you would be living in the forest. And for most of us, she would always joke that she would be dead. You can't wear high heels in the forest, you can't run fast, you can't hunt. And so you would not be able to survive." So Bob Marley's political songs, amazing. But also, if it wasn't for his more lovey-dovey songs, Three Little Birds and others. Many people, he wouldn't have gotten the same international success, and therefore those political songs would have never been heard rather than just kind of, you know, swept under the rug as much as possible. And so Redbone did the same thing. And after being blacklisted in 1973, they put out this song, Come and Get Your Love, in 1974, which was so good that it couldn't be contained, it couldn't be stopped. And so they got unblacklisted in the US because DJ said, this is the hot song. We can't, people aren't going to listen to my radio show if I don't play this song. And like I said, got all the way to number 5 in the Billboard charts and, helped resurrect this band. So think that that's a really cool story. They were very much inspired by your boy Jimi Hendrix, who apparently said that Lolly Vegas was his favorite guitarist and biggest influence in music. I couldn't quite find where Hendrix said that, but Wikipedia says that he did. So I thought that was cool too.
Next week is the birthday of Jimi Hendrix. Since you brought up the topic of music and American Indian musicians, I want to do a shout out to 3 people. First is Art Pepper, whose very famous song, Wichita Toe, is a kind of jazz classic. He actually is from Portland. Second, Buffy St. Marie, particularly her song, Now That the Buffalo's Gone. And since you brought up guitarists, the great underrated guitarist Jesse Ed Davis, who played on Taj Mahal's first album. And he died at a very young age, but great Native American rock and roll guitar player.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we got music. We got, some poetry. We got, a little bit of genocide, but we'll try and stay away from that. There's a old writer that I would love to shout out. I know you like as well. Is that a good place to go next, or do you have something on the tip of your tongue?
Go for it.
Cool. So one of my absolute favorite Native American writers, or really just writers in general, is a man by the name of Darcy McNichol, who wrote all the way back in the 1930s. God damn.
Yeah, his
And
first novel was published in 1936.
yeah, The Surrounded, which I have a cool quote from. Darcy McNichol was not only a writer, but did lots of work in Washington as well. He is of Cree and Métis nations. And yeah, I want to read a quote from that book you just mentioned, 1936, The Surrounded, which, according to one writer at the time, or shortly thereafter, someone who wrote about Native American literature, apparently, and I think you will disagree with this, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Apparently, the release of The Surrounded led to a literary movement more notable than the Harlem Renaissance.
I would definitely disagree with that.
That's what I think too, especially because I don't know. I'm not aware of this huge literary movement in the 1940s or whatever. You talked about
exactly
the 60s and
the large American Indian literary movement basically began with
Momaday.
Not with 1969, and then went to Silko, Erdrich, Michael Doris, James Welch, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
And
So I
actually,
would say that Darcy McNichol was publishing, kind of in isolation. And given that it's more than 30 years between Darcy McNichol's novel and Momaday's novel, I don't think that you can say that he was part of a Native American literary movement. I mean, he was a really cool writer, but there weren't lots of other people at the same time. And I could go on for days on the Harlem Renaissance.
right. And we will.
And we will.
And I don't know the context, but it sounds like these things are probably related. Certainly mine, I think your favorite Darcy McNichol book as well, Wind from an Enemy Sky, was published after his death,
Precisely.
And I think that was in 76. And so I would think
Yes,
that
it
it
was
would
the
just be
year
because of
after
this
his
movement.
death. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was the year after his death when it was published.
So you would think,
So it was published after Momaday, etc.
right. And I would assume that part of the reason it was published is because there was now this collective of authors doing their thing and releasing stuff that was quite popular.
Yeah, it's sort of similar. This thought just occurred to me on a completely different topic. It's sort of similar to the Latin American boom with Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Carlos Fuentes and Julio Cortázar and Mario Vargas Llosa. And people talk about Borges as being the sort of generator of that, even though he was significantly older and publishing way before they did. So it's a kind of similar thing with Darcy McNichol.
Mm. And speaking of Darcy, here is the quote I pulled from The Surrounded. It was inevitable that a new age would come. It is beginning now, and your boy is standing there where the road divides. He belongs to a new time. He may not stay in this valley, and it makes no difference whether he does or not. It is what he makes of himself that will count. It will be felt by all.
I really like that quote because it talks about two things simultaneously: what he makes of himself. So it's about your individual journey, but then the result of that journey is felt by the entire community. So you have the one and the many simultaneously. I really like that.
Me too. And I love the optimism piece. It's inevitable that a new age would come. The novel is about this man, and I think he's Cree as well. I think Darcy kind of writes in the sort of
Yes,
semi autobiographical way, but
correct,
the
correct.
but the main protagonist spends his early adulthood in Portland, Oregon, of all places, a very white place, as we know, especially in the 1930s. Yikes, I can't even imagine. And then comes back to Montana and is confronted, and all of Darcy McNichol's books kind of talk about these two sides of the coins of these often mixed race native people trying to, they have one foot in the, colonizer world and one foot in their, ancestral home, and trying to blend those two things and recognizing that, you know, the reservation is not where the mobility and the income is where history and tradition and family is. But in order to preserve these bloodlines and this heritage, you have to sort of, again, you have to integrate with the white world in some ways, at the very least, to make money. And so, just love that line that it's inevitable that a new age would come. These people aren't dying, they're not going anywhere. They're continuing to mix with white people, and so there's always going to be this heritage continuing on, and it's just a matter of time before we build something new.
And again, speaking of talking about the native population in the present tense as opposed to the past tense, perhaps it's time to talk about the greatest TV show of all times.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Go.
Well, if no one is familiar, I think it started, doesn't matter, started a couple of years ago, 3 seasons of Reservation Dogs. What a incredibly fantastic show. It was created by Sterling Harjo. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name, of the Seminole Nation. And it is just fantastic. It's really, really cool. It's funny. It's this coming in of age tale of these four friends who their friend and one of their brothers tragically dies. They're all teenagers, and his name was Daniel, and his big dream was to always go from Oklahoma, where they live, to Los Angeles and to see the Pacific Ocean. And as someone who now lives here, I can totally understand the magic about this place. Living in Oregon my whole life until moving here, I always knew that California is the special place. So certainly for teenagers living in, present day Oklahoma, where again, not lots of upward mobility from an economic sense, even a cultural sense. And so to have this dream to go to LA is really cool. And so, despite Daniel not making it physically, the four friends make this their goal. And rather than focusing on getting into college or getting jobs, they go on this, journey to try and get some money and get themselves to LA. And it's just a fantastic show, riddled with culture and, playing with some of these stereotypes that have been so negative for so long, but kind of taking them back, having a hand in the spirit world. There are not only references to spirits, but there are characters who are spirits who interact with characters. There is mythology, like the infamous deer lady,
My favorite character in the show.
yeah, who has a fantastic, starts in the show as it's just this mythical, you know, creature that the kids think is like a ghost tale that their like uncles told to like keep them from misbehaving. But then you find out the real story of Dear Lady, who was this girl who had a horrible experience in a boarding school, way too common of a story that we know persisted all over the US and Canada, and comes into these, sort of superpowers to escape this really horrible condition, and then spends her life not haunting children, but hunting wolves, or men, who are acting as wolves and carrying out various, bad deeds. So she's kind of like the,
And
judge, jury, and
and
executioner.
and at least one of the men she kills was one of the people who was in charge of the boarding school that she was at.
Right. Yeah. Really, really cool show. I pulled a quote from it. And if I didn't say the show is supposed to, or is based off of like the Muskogee Nation and yeah, that reservation out in Oklahoma. I pulled this quote from the character's name is Bucky, who's like a friend of the parents and stuff. So sort of a side character portrayed by Wes Studi, who is a great actor and has been like the Native American in basically every Native American featured movie. He's in Dances with Wolves and The Last of the Mohicans. He plays Geronimo, and Geronimo, I think it's the American Hero, I think is the subtitle of that movie. Anyway,
Right.
here's his quote, another one I love. Very much sounds like Carl Sagan. And the quote is, "Every element of our bodies was made inside an exploding star. We just borrow stardust until we die and then return it for something else to use."
The other thing, I mean, you alluded to this already, but I just want to reinforce the idea that one of the many things that's cool about the show is to demonstrate that mythology is not this imaginary thing, that it has a real presence in everyday life, and that recognizing that and performing various rituals are very important to the community. And it's not just something from the distant past.
Yeah. And again, this show is just such a celebration. So whether you have a connection to Native American culture or heritage at all, super recommend it. Again, it's really funny, it's really cute, it's really, just homey and makes you feel warm and good. It's just such a celebration. The whole like cast and crew is all like Native people as well. So again, it's, as I'm sure people have know who are of any minority group, right? That getting good jobs in white dominated industries, particularly entertainment, is always really tough. And so to have the show that again was really good and really successful, but then also was a source of income and career experience for, you know, not just these young actors, but the writers and camera people, makeup people, etc. So again, just a really cool yeah, can't talk about it enough. You said one of the greatest shows of all time, and yeah, I second that. It's really good. Can't recommend it enough.
And just want to emphasize again the limited opportunities that Native actors have had. So again, I want to have a shout out to Wes Studi and Graham Greene, who were both in the show. And my favorite Native actor who's not in the show, Tattoo Cardinal.
Mm.
I love her work.
Yeah, it's so cool. I have on my sheet one more quote that I want to get into. And I think it's a kind of cool place to throw it. Doesn't quite tie into the show as much, though it gets there. And so to bring us out of pop culture and bring us back into like the scholarship for a moment, there are so many writers, whether it's, fiction or nonfiction, who have made huge contributions. 2 episodes ago, when we were talking about CRT, we of course couldn't talk about CRT without talking about intersectionality. We made a point of recognizing that, right, it's one thing to be a woman because you are oppressed in this patriarchal society. It's another thing to be a black woman who has all that baggage of being a woman. Then you add racial racism on top of that. It's then another thing to be a queer black woman because now you're outside of the patriarchy in this other way that you are not having children and you, for lack of better terms, have no use to the white male power structure because if you're a queer black woman, there's nothing that you can bring to the table, which is why it's so critical for these voices to be lifted because if we want to topple this power structure, we need to reject it. In the words of Frantz Fanon, we need to vomit it out. And so the queer black woman or the queer indigenous woman is such a radical and important tool for disrupting this structure. And as I said, I would mention my intellectual hero, Chris Finley, 3 times. And here she is from her paper, Bringing Sexy Back and Out of Native Studies Closet. And this is a bit of a longer quote, so sorry about that, but I think it's really good. And again, being able to be taught by this incredible professor, I'm so lucky. And this is a very short paper, so if you haven't read this, I think it's like 5 pages. It's very quick little article, but it's really powerful, really interesting. And here's the quote: "The scholarly work of indigenous feminisms centers Native women and critiques of white heteropatriarchy, colonialism, sexual violence, and the U.S. nation state model of nationalism. I want to take this a step further, as some Native feminists have done, and add the intersection of these power relations with sexuality to reveal colonizing logics and practices embedded in constructing Native peoples as hypersexual and non heteronormative. It is time to bring sexy back to Native studies and quit pretending we are boring and pure and do not think about or write about sex. We are alive, we are sexy, and some of us natives are queer. Native nationalisms have the potential to be sexy and are already sexualized, but to be sexy from a Native feminist perspective, they need to be decolonizing and critical of heteropatriarchy. And again, that is Chris Finley, who is of the Colville Nation. And just think again, yeah, it's such a cool thing to really think about that. There's all of these conversations out here these days about trans issues and wherever you may fall, there's nuanced conversations. There's maybe things to be said about how to best deal with the issues of sports or the issues of children's safety or the issues of bathrooms or whatever. I think all of those issues are quite easy, but I can understand that there are nuanced of positions. But again, the need to highlight these voices and recognize that these are all people who all have their own perspective is so important. And when you start to listen to these folks, you realize, okay, this American project literally gives zero fucks about these kinds of people and wishes that they were dead and didn't exist. And that's not the kind of system that I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of a system where it doesn't matter what color you are, where you're from, what your, resources or level of intelligence are, but that you simply as a human being are worthy of love and respect.
Here, here. And so, first, I want to give a shout out when you were talking about queer Black women want to give a shout out, of course, to Audre Lorde. If one has not read Audre Lorde, one needs to right away. And there
That's
you
because
go,
I
sister.
found all of my printed out stuff. Doing research for this episode, I was like digging through all of the articles that I printed out and kept during college. And yeah, this is just the first chapter of Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider, which is a fantastic work.
Great, great book. And the second thing I want to say, when you were talking about the Native community, they interestingly, many Native nations use the term two spirit to describe people who are genderly fluid. And so you don't have this, you know, you don't have this seemingly overly complicated language of straight versus queer. And that seems in those two terms seem in opposition to each other. And in Native communities, talking about two spirits, there is not that kind of conflict. It's just accepted.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's when at fear of sounding like a broken record, but when you have cultures that aren't predicated on scarcity and inequality, then oh man, all of a sudden people can just be who and what they want to be. Oh, just because you were born with certain genitals doesn't mean you can't be someone who goes and hunts. Or if you were born with a different set of genitals and you want to be someone who stays home and takes care of the kids, or if you're somebody who likes both of those things and doesn't want to be, you know, put on one side of a binary. And all of those experiences are real and important. And it is really, really sad to live in a culture where those those voices are really, really under threat these days because of course, particularly the Republican Party these days and MAGA Republicans specifically. And even before that, it has not been easy for trans people in this country ever. And there, of course, have been strides, but then, it's like one step forward, two steps back.
Agreed. And the notion of fluidity is much more important than the concept of boundaries. And as a society, we need to become much more fluid and accepting of difference than we are.
Hmm.
So maybe it's time for me to read another poem.
Ooh, yes, please. This could have been the whole thing. I've had a number of viewers say, "Man, you need to get Poncho on the Calm app or something, just reading bedtime stories for people to go to sleep to." So I have no doubt that I have no doubt that our viewers are going to be stoked to listen to this poem on the Mama Day one. Yeah, I just closed my eyes and took it in. So yeah.
So before I read this poem, I want to have a shout out to another text, and it is called Project 562. And it is a book by the photographer Matika Wilbur, Wilbur. And what she has done is to, over several years, traveled all around the country and she wants to have a photograph of somebody or somebodies from every single recognized tribe in the United States. So at the time she was doing this project, the federal government recognized 562 tribes. And so it's a great photography book, really beautifully done.
And I haven't done the research, but it's shocking that that number has increased to 574 now. You know, the US government, of course, wants as few nations and native people as possible. So that number has increased in the last couple of years is interesting. I'm not sure why. It's probably that a nation split into two or something. But
And
anyway,
why the federal government should be in charge of deciding who is officially an Indian nation is completely screwed up.
yeah. And it's really not to go too far into it, but of course, as slightly more black focused people, because that's what we are. There's the notion of the one drop rule that one drop of black blood makes you black and therefore eligible for slavery. The exact opposite is true to get federal recognition as a Native American, you need to have it depends on the nation, but half or a quarter, which then means that over time, unless you are, very intentional about who you have children with, that is always going to be a decreasing number. You're not going to be able to keep, just
Precisely.
just think about it for white people, right? There used to be a much larger percentage of the population, and as white people have chosen to have children with people of other races, well, now, if the quota was, in order for this to be a white country, it needs to be 70%. That's going to get beaten out really quick as it keeps decreasing over time. So, yeah, that's one of those little ways that these federally recognized nations that, again, already have massive issues because of where they have been given land, often in the worst parts of states, oftentimes states where these people aren't from, and even just having a plot of land in general when many nations were nomadic peoples. Yeah, to then have this blood quantum thing where the numbers in your nation will always be decreasing and therefore getting less federal funding and all of that stuff.
Exactly. The poem I'm going to read is by Joy Harjo, and it is from the book The Woman Who Fell from the Sky. And this is the very last poem in the book. And it's a poem that I always read on Black Friday.
Native American Heritage Day.
Precisely. The poem is called Perhaps the World Ends Here. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women. At this table, we gossip, we call enemies, and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor, falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together once again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table and have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. Joy Harjo, former Poet Laureate of the United States, who is from Oklahoma.
Mm. Yeah, that's another really good poem. It made me think a little bit about Nelson Mandela and how he would always host any sort of like big intense meeting at his home, and you know before they could get down to business, he would keep jumping up and refilling drinks and bringing them food and stuff.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, food is important. We haven't talked about food and the importance of food traditions in Native cultures. The three sisters of corn, beans, and squash, and how that is at the center of Native diet, and with water problems, particularly in the Southwest, it is difficult for people to have nourishing food sources and supplies, which leads to people eating canned food, which leads to high blood pressure and diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have a water crisis, which creates a food crisis, which creates a health crisis.
Again, these
Shout out to Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior from Laguna Pueblo in
Hmm.
Mexico.
And this is, another really interesting reason why we have so much love for Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, because intersectionality is so important. You can't just look at these issues of Native Americans, because I'm sure of course, there are Native Americans who have benefited from the system. There's, oh, well, yeah, it was bad for Native Americans in like the 1700s, but look at them now. They have casinos and they make all this money. They don't have to pay taxes, like other people. It's like, yeah, but then you look at the experience of many of these folks who are on reservations and the intersectionality between being Native and being on a reservation and being low income because of lack of opportunities there, and how the US government has intentionally, again, not only put these reservations on lands that is more or less not arable in most circumstances, but also far away from urban centers and therefore hard for folks to get jobs or commute. And yeah, the issue of food is a big one that, of course, is going to affect lower income people much more than higher income people. And yeah, the life on reservations from an income perspective is not great, to say the least. It's one of the worst in the country. And so, yeah, these are, again, there's all of these issues that get wrapped up that could all be alleviated if capitalism was not the law of the land, if some sort of, and let's try and stay away from it, if some sort of system that was based on a foundation not of free trade, but of, again, recognizing that we are one human family, that if we have one person in our family who is taking more than their fair share, or is always sick all the time, or is violent all the time, that is going to affect not just that person, but everybody in the family. And the same ethic should be taken from a whole society civilization standpoint, that if we have people who are on the street without healthcare, without education, without food or water, that is going to have a negative impact on us. I mean, I feel like outside of the economy or foreign policy or immigration being a big political thing, the most political thing I hear people talking about all the time is homelessness. That there's all these homeless people who are making my neighborhood unsafe, or who are just unsightly to look at, or whatever it might be. That's something that doesn't have to exist. The money is there. It's sitting by way of assets that are owned by a very, very small number of people in this country.
Wait a second. Don't you think those people who are houseless have chosen to do that? Don't they want to be that way? Don't they want to live on the street?
I'm sure you could go find one, but of course, obviously not. There's, again, such a huge intersection here between income and mental illness. Again, families, so hard to raise, it's so hard and expensive to raise kids in the first place. And now, add in schizophrenia to the mix, or some other, pretty severe mental health.
And as with other problems we have talked about, as you just said, people I don't want to go downtown because there's too many people camping out on the streets, and this is disgusting. And they need to pass laws so that people won't be camping out on the street. And when I go downtown, I will feel safe. And people are not asking the question, why do we have so many people at this moment in history who do not have a place to live? What the fuck is happening in our society that is causing that to happen? It's the same thing that we talked about when we were talking about immigration. Why are all these people coming to the United States? They don't want to leave Mexico or Guatemala or Nicaragua, or Honduras, El Salvador, wherever. There's problems in their country that is driving them to leave. The same thing is true here. People don't want to be homeless and living in tents on the street. What is it about the American system and the American economy at this moment in time that is causing that situation to happen? And people are not asking the question, why is this the case? They just want to say, oh, we got to get rid of these people.
I don't think it's too difficult to convince most people, especially, liberal minded or getting left people, that this is a problem and this is why the problem is happening. But then there's this like instant like slam on the brakes of like, oh, well, yeah, we maybe realize the issue is capitalism, but we can't do anything about capitalism. That would be crazy. That'd be too radical. And again, I want to point you, well, to bring it to the theme of this episode, Native Americans in this country since 1492 uh,
Exactly.
have had such a horrible go at things, such despicable, diabolical, intentional actions taken by an entire government and race of people to erase them from this land. And they are still here. They are still fighting. And not only that, there are tons of them who are doing amazing, wonderful, positive, optimistic things, writing great books, sharing stories, making delicious Indian tacos and fry bread or catfish or whatever it might be. They haven't given up. So many people have lost their lives sacrificing themselves to this cause, which means that I can't give up. And all we're looking for is folks who are willing to take in this information and recognize that something needs to be changed. We're not saying we have all the answers, but one of the best ways to find the answers is to gather and talk and discuss. And that's why we started this program. It's not just because we like to hear ourselves talking. Yeah, we kind of enjoy that, I guess. And we talk about some cool stuff, but we're really trying to build community. So please, if this episode or if any of our episodes have come your way, please get in touch with us. We want to hear from you, whether that's on our Tuesday night Zooms or just, texts or emails or submitting questions or topics, ideas for episodes. We are open and willing to hear all of your thoughts and feedback, whatever it is, because we are most invested in building community, getting people together who all recognize that this is fucked and that we have to do something about it. And we can't just keep saying, well, oh well, this is how the capitalism system is. I'm just gonna carve out my own little piece for myself. I'm just gonna surround myself in my books and my music and my alcohol and my shitty job and just say fuck it and live for myself. You don't want to do that. It doesn't take that much time. We're asking for sort of 2 hours a week. Check out the show, check out our Zoom, but there's all sorts of other ways you can get involved that take less time or more time if you have it.
I want to close with one more quote. This is from Louise Erdrich and her novel, The Painted Drum. Life will break you. Nobody can protect you from that, and living alone won't either, for solitude will also break you with its yearning. You have to love. You have to feel. It is the reason you are here on earth. You are here to risk your heart. You are here to be swallowed up. And when it happens that you are broken or betrayed or left or hurt or death brushes near, let yourself sit by an apple tree and listen to the apples falling all around you in heaps, wasting their sweetness. Tell yourself that you tasted as many as you could.
It's been a few years now, close to 10, but I have read that book, and that's cool that I have synthesized some of that into just my own perspective and dialogue. Because yeah, what a cool quote. And with that, it has come to be that time. I hope that you have learned a thing or two and something in this episode caused you to smile. In the words of Darcy McNichol, a man by himself was nothing, a shout in the wind. But men together, each acting for each other and as one, even a strong wind from an enemy sky had to respect their power. And our song of the week is We Were All Wounded at Wounded Knee by Redbone. For Jesse and Poncho, thank you again so much for tuning into Radicals with Age. 10th episode is now done. We got a lot more than 10 to go, but hope you'll stick with us. And with that, we will see you after a while.